any skill that is able to be mimicked by artificial intelligence is not going to be necessary. So students aren't necessarily going to know how to play the instrument. They're going to know how to direct the player. And I think it will free us. I'm excited by it because I think it will free us from doing what I like to call the donkey work, which is like pushing the pixel, writing that essay absolutely from scratch. AI is going to liberate us in terms of those mechanical activities that take a really long time.
Welcome to the Afikra podcast. My name is Mikey Mhenno. Today on this series, we have a collaboration with Qatar Foundation, and we are talking about everything related to AI and the intersection of AI and art. With me is a long friend of Afikra, Basma Hamdy, who is a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University in Qatar. She is an assistant professor of graphic design at VCUarts Qatar and has been there for quite some time. She's a research-based designer, author, and educator producing work that bridges historical, political, and social issues with archival documentation, participatory, and critical mechanisms. Basma, welcome back to Afikra. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Mikey. It's great to be here.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the sort of like headline of today's conversation, which is AI and art and sort of the intersections of those two things. And before we get started about it, 2-3 years ago, would you have predicted that you'd be having this conversation?
I don't think so. I don't think I was thinking that far, like in that direction, let's say.
But it seems like now it's impossible to have a conversation about art in any medium without talking about the complexities and the challenges that AI is presenting, both the industry in art, but also sort of the practice of art. Does that sound right too?
Yeah. I think AI has sort of taken the world by storm, and in every discipline, in every space, there is a conversation about how AI is modifying, changing, affecting the players or the people in those spaces. And I think art is no exception. So I teach at VCUarts Qatar. I've been here for more than 10 years. And so VCUarts Qatar is celebrating its 25th anniversary, which is amazing. And it's quite an important priority for QF's national vision. And I think we have these conversations. I think our faculty and staff meeting last year in the opening remarks were one of the very first things that our dean was talking about was AI, and jokingly saying, by the way, I didn't write my speech using AI. So yeah, it's taking over the world and it's everywhere. And I think we're having this conversation here in VCU, Qatar in general, the Arab region, all the time right now.
For people who don't listen to, who hadn't heard the first season of the Tasmeem podcast, which you should go back and listen to it, which is really, really good. Can you give our listeners a sort of a brief understanding of what the mission is and sort of the history of VCUarts Qatar?
Yeah, so VCUarts Qatar is an art and design branch campus of VCUarts Enrichment. So it's only the arts portion of VCU, the university. And really the mission of VCUarts Qatar is to focus on elevating the lives of citizens, of people through art and design. So looking at ways to innovate, to create new spaces for creativity, and to promote forward thinking, but also very culturally aware view of art and design. And it's been quite a powerful force in the region, I would say. I like to say that it's the leading art and design school in the region for many reasons. I could elaborate on that, but I really do believe the reason why we're so, we stand apart is because of our bridging, our attempts or our efforts to bridge history with the future.
Yeah, it's an incredible program with a really, really incredible faculty. So
thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about ethics. When people think about AI, when like a 15-year-old listening to this is thinking about AI, maybe they're thinking, okay, I can use ChatGPT to help me with my homework. This can help me with tedious tasks at work. But let's talk a little bit about the ethics associated with it. So when somebody's thinking about AI and its role in art, what are the ethical considerations that can emerge? And are there challenges associated with those when you think about how to integrate AI into the art world at large?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, but I think if I were to try and respond to it, even though it's quite loaded, because I think the area of ethics in AI is still kind of developing, is I would have to ask, like, what are the building blocks of our world today? Like, what is our world built on? And I'm not just talking about Qatar or the Arab region. I'm talking about internationally. What are the ethical building blocks of our world? And I'll ask you, like, do you think it's optimization? Is it consumption? Or is it more looking at the ethical components of constantly questioning why we're doing things and trying to improve the lives of the average person? So, I mean, if we look at a cross section of the world, I think we can agree that I think the building blocks are more and more turning towards consumption and optimization. So the reasons for that are so many. One of the reasons is that we live in a world that's basically dominated by capitalist agendas and a certain economic model that came from the influence of Western modernity. And I'm speaking from Qatar and I'm speaking from the Arab region. And so I'm speaking from this space where how did Western modernity affect us as Arabs, as Arab nations? And so I think Western modernity has done so much amazing things for us and introduced empirical science. But with empirical science came this separation, this Cartesian duality. And so that is kind of in contradiction to our own ethics as, let's say, Muslims or as Arabs. Muslims and Arabs tend to focus more on collaboration and cooperation. So what kind of ethics? Are they the ethics of optimization and being able to capitalize on certain products and being able to, let's say, make money off of a product that I designed using AI, or getting a good grade on my essay because AI helped me? Like, what is the long-term goal of that? So I think it's a very loaded question because we have to ask ourselves, like, what are ethics in this world? Where are the ethics in this universe that we're living in?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because it's like you're taking a step backwards, right? You're saying, okay, before we can understand what the ethics are, let's first interrogate the nature of ethics to begin with, right?
Right. And not just the nature of ethics as an abstract, but the nature of the ethics we chose to adopt.
Yeah.
So what have we chosen to adopt as a human race? Like, let's say we go extinct. What is the legacy that we're going to leave behind for, let's say, a new kind of race that takes over the world? If we're going to look at a very scientific view, like, what is our legacy? Our legacy right now is climate crisis. And there's not really much we can say for ourselves. We've developed a lot of technologies based on fear, based on getting there before the next guy. I mean, if you watch the Oppenheimer film, I think Oppenheimer is great because even though it's talking about something that happened years ago, it's really still relevant today. Because if you think about the atom bomb as an example of AI, I mean, what were the ethics back then? The ethics back then, oh my God, let's make this thing happen before the Nazis do. And right now, I think what's happening with AI is like a race to compete to get AI working as fast as we can before someone else does, right? So how can we think about ethics when all we're doing is just trying to get there faster? And so if you compare that to like the life of a student who's studying art in let's say VCU Qatar, or studying design in VCU Qatar, I can talk to them about things like intellectual property and copyright, and you shouldn't copy. The problem is the whole premise of artificial intelligence is copying. like the whole mechanism behind it, right? The whole algorithm behind it is about copying, right?
Yeah, generative text.
That's how it,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's tricky.
It is really, really tricky because it's basically saying like that it has introduced this like Control C, Control V function. This like insanely powerful Control C, Control V function. And it's saying, okay, but use that ethically.
Yes, right. Exactly. Like, okay, you created these algorithms, which are like these generative adversarial networks, which essentially what they do is you feed them like huge amount of data sets. And the reason why I know this is because I'm working on a research project like that. So, and then you're asking them to like look at these massive amounts of data sets. And then basically you're asking them to weave together something from all of these data sets. And that's creative copying.
Yeah.
That's essentially what that like, I would say it's not very ethical.
Yeah.
Right? But it can, if we let it be, if we acknowledge it.
So,
you know what I mean?
So give me a sort of a framework to acknowledge it. What are ways that students, consumers, practitioners could begin to think about ways in which to use this genie that's been left out of the bottle, right? In ways that actually can support and conform with the ethical framework that you subscribe to.
Yeah. So I think maybe if we want to, so you're talking about how can they use it with by also acknowledging that they've used it, or that are you talking
or just
about
like understand it? I mean, like to be like let's use the process of like sampling in hip hop as an example, right? So like the first hip hop song ever that went that was a commercial success and a cultural success, Rapper's Delight, featured uncredited verses. The MC stole the verse from another MC, and uncredited instrumentals. They took Sheik's Good Times, right? And the consumers and the practitioners loved the song, became insanely popular, and became a very valuable piece of art. But over time, over the years, the sort of the consumer framework and legal framework emerged around it. Say, wait a second, we're okay with this, we're not okay with that. How could an artist like an artistic group like Sugar Hill Gang produce art like this that conforms and supports our newly found ethical framework? Right? They had to like sort of mint a new framework for it. So like, given this new technology that has emerged, what are the questions that you think students and consumers should be thinking about? Maybe not what are the answers, but what are the questions?
I mean, some of the questions are what is intellectual property? What is ownership? What is originality? Like, and if you are going to, I mean, I think that is the main issue that's circulating, especially in the art and design world, is if I'm creating something using, let's say, ChatGPT or Midjourney, and it's not really something that I made from scratch, first of all, who gets the credit? And second of all, am I cheating? And so the answer is yes and no, because if you were to interrogate the history of art, starting with, let's say, modern art, even before modern art, representational art, and then you go into the years that followed, you'll find that every single artist appropriated and borrowed from different cultures.
Feel like an artist.
Pablo Picasso, his famous like Cubist work is all borrowed from like African traditional masks and borrowed from multiple, and there's so many artists that have done this. A lot of musicians have used sampling and borrowing and copying. And I maybe I'm going to be a little bit controversial and say, I think we just have to see it from a different lens. So instead of trying to apply the same principles that we apply in a world pre-AI, to a world that's post-AI, we need to like reframe the narrative. We need to say, okay, so what is intellectual property and who created it? And if you look at the history of intellectual property, you will see that it was created based on this commodity market space. So this idea that I create this thing and then I create a copyright for it, or I create a patent for it, and then it becomes mine and nobody else can use it. And I think that is coming from a space of competition. So it's this idea, who's going to make something first, like what I was talking about before with Oppenheimer and the atom bomb, like who's going to make this invention and then write a paper and prove that it's theirs. This is all a Western system based on Western ideologies of scientific empiricism. And we've adopted it because we think that they know better. But really, the ethics of the West is dominated by fear. It's motivated by fear of not getting there in time, fear of being attacked. So if you think of any war, any crisis that happened in the history of Western civilization, you'll see that it's motivated by fear. Whereas our history, at least in pre-modern, is built on collaboration and cooperation. So when I think of like my area of specialization, which is Arabic typography and type design, I mean, no calligrapher created, let's say, a system such as Nasb or Thuluth, and then said, Eureka, I've created this system and it's mine and I own Thuluth and nobody else can use it. And if anybody else uses Thuluth, that is mine. I stamp my name on it and you have to pay me. So that's why we have hundreds of thousands of calligraphers who are all using Thuluth, who are all using these beautiful calligraphic styles, because calligraphers work together. They weren't necessarily competing. Of course, yes, in some cases they were, but competing in a collaborative, cooperative way, so that when one of them reached elegance, each reached a certain superiority in their craft, they have students that they teach this to, they spread that beautiful craft that they've developed. So it's not about competing. So I would tell my students, when you're using this tool, or I would even advise professionals when you're using this tool, use it wisely, use it with your own. You don't have to necessarily refer to the dictionary of world ethics. You have your own moral compass. You know what's right and wrong in your gut. You can tell when you've done something and it just doesn't sit right with you. But really, I think at the end of the line, like AI, generative AI is based on hundreds of thousands of images that were created by other people anyway, right?
Yeah.
So there's already this like bias towards copying, and maybe we can talk about that space. But I feel like for students, I would say if it's helping your research, use it. And we have frameworks in mind that we've put together, let's say in our syllabi when we're teaching. And also we have some workshops here at VCU and in Education City that are aimed to like educate students on how, and professors on how to use this technology wisely.
Yeah.
So there are frameworks that are being developed as we speak, but really I would say it's like, it's just another tool. You know, you can still create, you can create unethical creations or artwork or designs through other tools. You know, it doesn't have to be AI, right?
You know, I always have the sense that like that you learn a finite set of skills. So if you look, for example, if you compare like a 25-year-old compared to a 65-year-old, the 65-year-old probably has really, really beautiful handwriting, and like if they're writing in Latin script, like writes beautiful cursive. If they're writing in Arabic script, has like really beautiful handwritten in Arabic, right? But the 25-year-old types like a tornado. And it's because that's what they learned. That's the skill they learned. And their handwriting is probably awful. And the same is true for 15-year-old. And it will be even more true for 5-year-olds, current day 5-year-olds. So current day 5-year-olds are growing up in an AI native environment. They are going to understand how to constructively copy with all these different ethical frameworks, fully fledged, fully built out. And so I'm curious, when you as an educator and your colleagues at VCU are training the next generation of these artists and having them think through all these questions about how to collaboratively copy and all these different things, what are they not learning? What sort of base skills are going to be lost at the wayside? Because for these students, because like when Photoshop came around, that they lost certain skills, they stopped teaching certain skills, and Photoshop took control of it. When Google came around, like we don't teach the Dewey Decimal System anymore, right? You don't teach how to look stuff up in the library. So what skills do you think are going to be lost for students who are entering design schools like VCU in the years to come because of this huge chapter turn?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of skills. So those skills, that any skill that is able to be mimicked or replicated by artificial intelligence is not going to be necessary. So students aren't necessarily going to know how to play the instrument. They're going to know how to direct the player. And I think that's mainly the key, is that if we're teaching, let's say, graphic design or interior design, we don't actually have to sit there and push pixels. Pushing pixels lost its allure, I would say, 20 years ago. I still think it's something that you might want to do if you are producing something almost like an exercise in craft. So you want to kind of sit there on your Illustrator and design something, because kind of like a calligrapher who takes a reed and dips it in the ink, kind of like a musician who wants to sit down and play an instrument. But you don't necessarily have to play an instrument to listen to music. So it's going to be the same thing. I think it will free us. I'm excited by it because I think it will free us from doing what I like to call the donkey work, which is like pushing the pixel, writing that essay absolutely from scratch. AI is going to liberate us in terms of those mechanical activities that take a really long time. So putting together an essay is going to take a fraction of the time. Designing a logo is going to take a fraction of the time. But there's still an important component of creativity there, because AI is not necessarily creative in the way that human beings are creative. It can mimic creativity, but it's not creative.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's
predictable.
Yeah, it's going to be this like old-fashioned, it's like, oh, did you design this logo by hand? It's like, oh, I designed it by hand in Photoshop.
Wow. Or like, oh my God, I'm going to actually listen to someone give a lecture in person. Like, it's not going to be a hologram of him speaking based on his past books and lectures. And, the AI is actually standing there making a lecture based on this person's personality, his tone of voice, his history of writing. And the lecture will be amazing, but it's not actually him. But then maybe I'll go to one and it's actually a human.
Yeah.
And it'll be fascinating. Yeah. But I like to think of it kind of like the invention of photography. I love to give this example to my students all the time. Like, photography was invented and the painters went, oh, woe is me. I'm being replaced by this machine and I can never paint again. But then that's how art developed and became what it is today. And photography is still very much in demand, and you can create beautiful art-based photography, but you can also create very pragmatic photography, right? That's very machine-based.
In terms of this idea of AI being a master copier, right? The generative side of things. From your given your understanding, how much of what we are feeding the more dominant AIs right now is coming from the Arabic speaking world, and is in Arabic?
Yeah, not much. I think we are getting there. I think if you do try ChatGPT in Arabic, you might get some good results. But of course, technology was not necessarily designed for us. And we can think about anyway, the history of technology, especially when it comes to the Arab world. And for me, how it kind of intertwines with graphic design is, the typewriter was not created for Arabs, and the movable type was not created to print Arabic books. But then we had to kind of play catch up. And that's why the Arabic written script is kind of lagging behind in terms of technology. So I feel like, and of course, Kathy O'Neill is a really famous researcher on algorithmic bias and how, the writers of the code are not necessarily going to use the code, and they're not necessarily writing it from a space of equity and inclusion. They're writing it from a very skewed perspective, right? So I think there are efforts in place to kind of open that up and embrace other cultures and religions and other modes of writing, different writing systems. I know, for example, Mona Diab, who is one of the leading researchers in AI in the United States. She's Egyptian originally. And I know her because we were in the same city studying for grad school. So she's a lovely person. But she's been appointed the new director of language technologies at Carnegie Mellon, which is like the top AI and computer science program in the world. And what she's taught, she's admittedly saying, I'm a Muslim, I'm an Arab, and I'm very much concerned about bringing in responsibility into the space of AI. And I think maybe one of the reasons, and so I'm so excited to have people like her, an Arab Muslim woman in that top position, because I think she will bring a huge amount of perspective into this conversation and then influence how this is being steered. So I think one of the really interesting conversations I listened to about AI was by Mo Gaudat, and he's an ex-Google executive who's one of the top leading executives at Google, and he talks about this term that or like two terms that he brings together, and he said we decouple power from responsibility, and I think that is the crisis that we're struggling with in today's world. I think it's specifically so significant for AI because it's moving at a speed that is unprecedented than other technologies. So we've almost like unleashed this beast that's developing really rapidly. And we're like, oh, so where is the ethics in this? But I think that's what we need to bring back together. We need to kind of make power very much responsible so that you don't have people creating things that are serving a certain agenda. Do you know what I mean?
100%. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about kind of what's happening in Qatar, and use that as an opportunity to talk about the conversation around the region as well. Where is this conversation at, both at VCU, in and around the QF world, in Qatar, in the region, as far as you're concerned? I mean, is this a conversation that you're just having sort of with yourself in your office, or is there a broader conversation happening across Doha?
No, there's a lot of broader conversations happening. I think we have spaces. For example, VCU had a couple of conversations where we just did some sessions for faculty and students. Education City had a Education City-wide educational panel and a conversational platform where they were informing, again, students and faculty about, first of all, how to use AI ethically, and then also what are the implications of using AI, how to credit it properly, and all of these things. But on a larger scale, there are efforts by, let's say, QF and QM to integrate AI technology not only into learning spaces, but also into museums and other cultural platforms. So, for example, the National Museum of Qatar opened the AI Digital Center in collaboration with Microsoft. And that is a space that's really targeted towards the younger generation. I mean, you mentioned the younger generation and how fast, like my kids, the way they type, I'm like, I think I'm a fast typer. And I'm like, they even type on their little
they type
controller.
with their thumbs.
Yeah. And I'm like, this is crazy. So I think it's so important to address youth and to address the younger generation and kind of help them understand what AI is and the ethics behind it. I mean, if we want to teach AI, I mean, essentially what AI is learning from us. They're like our children, right? And if you teach your child something good, if you teach it that the world is based on ethics and collaboration, it's going to be a collaborative individual. And if you teach it that the world is based on competition and war, it's going to want to invade you or wipe you out. And so it's so important to educate the younger generation because they're going to be the future of the algorithm writers, the coders that are going to maybe influence that code. So that is another wonderful initiative. There's also the Qatar Computing Research Institute that's part of QF, which is really looking at Arabic language processing, which I think is super important because Arabic, like I mentioned earlier, is a complex script and it's beautiful. And when technology, the earliest technology for printing, like movable type or the typewriter, or even like processors and computers were created, they didn't really think about Arabic. They were thinking about a Latin script that's kind of compartmentalized and not really thinking of connection, not really thinking of script grammar. And there were like attempts, let's modify Arabic, let's make it look like English, let's divide it up. But really, I think we're very proud of our language. And so I think this initiative is super powerful in terms of trying to bring Arabic language processing to computers and to users. There's also us, VCUarts Qatar, who are involved in a number of projects involving AI. We have the newly established Creative Research Institute. And that research institute just got official approval from VCUarts in Richmond. And under the research institute, we have research labs such as Type Arabi, but we also have X Lab, who are really looking at machine learning and computing and also coding and artificial intelligence. And I am actually involved in a project with Levi Hammett and with Tamer Nadim, who's a computer scientist on the Richmond campus, specifically looking at Arabic language and typography specifically with AI. How can we involve AI, use AI to generate forms of Arabic typography and kind of free it from the confinements of the computer that we're currently using and the keyboard that we're currently using. And OpenType right now is confining Arabic to the legacies that came with the Latin script. And so super exciting. So much is happening.
So going back to my first question of, did you think you were going to be having this conversation in 2 years? Do you have since there has been this like very important sea change, that doesn't come around every year, this is I think a generational sea change. Do you have a sense of the major conversations you are going to be having for the next sort of 10 years? Like, okay, we got to unpack these major things and I'm going to be talking about this basically for the next decade. Do you have a sense of what those thorny issues are?
I think it's probably going to be very similar to what I talked about before in terms of, when we free ourselves from the skill-based, let's say skill-based donkey work. I don't like to use that term, but we're going to open our spaces up for much more complex projects and interactions. And I think it's really exciting because AI is almost forcing us to think about where we were and where we're heading. So it's almost like it's a really, like you said, a really exciting time to be alive because we're looking back at the history of technology and then the future of technology is completely different. So in the past, technology was really based on machines executing very mechanical jobs. The future of technology is freeing us from doing anything related to these very, I would say, time-consuming skill-based work. So I'm imagining the conversations are going to be about ethics, are going to be about the future, are going to be about the environment, are going to be about the legacy that we're leaving as human beings for the future generations. And what do we want to create? And I think it's a point in time where we're examining our own histories and really looking closely at that 20th century development. Like, what was the 20th century all about? Like, what was industrialization and the economic model of capitalism all about? It was really about competition and power. And I would say, if I dare to say, a very masculine kind of outlook on life, very power oriented, very competitive. But I think the future is really looking at the world, since we're using AI to do these things that we no longer have to do, that are really about productivity. So AI is going to really help us with productivity, getting things done. It's going to free us to really examine those other aspects of our legacy and look at, well, how can we collaborate together? Well, how can we look at the world from a different perspective? How can we examine our legacy? Because we have to have a legacy that is like a parent to a child. What am I modeling? That's what my child is learning. My child is learning what I do. A child doesn't learn by you telling it, go wash your hands. A child sees you going to wash your hands, and then they're like, oh, interesting. I need to wash my hand. So I think we have to treat AI kind of like our kids,
It's tricky though, because the donkey work that you were describing, right? The pushing pixels was once seen, those tools were once seen to represent the liberation of time again, right? So when somebody could literally Control-C, Control-V, instead of cutting a piece of thing and getting a glue stick and pasting it, right?
Yeah.
That was seen as this massive sea change, which it was. It did represent a sea change. And the fact that you could Control-Z and undo something, the fact that when you typed something, when you made a mistake, all you saw was a red squiggly line and you didn't actually have to like go get white out or start all over again, right? All of that represented the liberation of time and the ability to be more efficient. But none of those developments reclaimed the sense of collaboration and to use your framework, this sort of like the more soulful things, right? As opposed to the idea that's just like raging masculine efficiency. So what gives you hope that this latest iteration of efficiency could achieve that when all of the rest of them have failed to achieve it? They've only just made us more efficient.
I think
maybe the donkey work is what we need to. Maybe we need to slow things down.
Yeah, but I think that's the point. I think we will slow down. So I think when we assign things to AI, we will have more free time to slow down, and I really do believe this. I mean, there's a huge movement on slow living and, actually the opposite of productivity. So do less instead of do more, and really trying to slow down and be more aware of your environment, kind of be more mindful of your spaces. And I think, yes, it's true. We did create a lot of technology that helped us, but that technology has also achieved a lot of great things. So we are addressing things, not to the scale that I hope it is, but we are addressing things like infectious disease. Science has allowed us to do that. We are addressing things like poverty in some way. We are addressing things like education. We aren't getting there. I think if you look at the trajectory of the human race and the development, I think we've come a long way. Like, I don't want to be living in the 1920s. Like, I'm much happier living here. We've extended human life. I mean, whether or not you think that's a good thing, but we've done a lot. We've achieved a lot. And I think we are on an upward trajectory. I do think we've made a lot of mistakes along the way, like fossil fuels, a lot of these like environmental mistakes, because we were so focused on what we talked about earlier, this very masculine drive to produce and make things and be better and be faster without really thinking about the implications. But I think the more and more conversations that I hear, the more books I read, the more people I have discussions with, the more I realize that people on a global scale are having this conversation. And the reason why it's affecting the global scale is because we have social media, we have the internet, we have this connectivity. So we are connected as a human race in ways that we were never connected before. And I think that if we put our minds and hearts in the right place, I think we can continue to affect positive change. There's always going to be the outliers. There's always going to be, the power hungry individuals who are, who are fostering maybe a sense of competition and not really thinking about the average person. But I think, at least in education, I think that's something we really value.
For somebody who doesn't know anything about this, except like maybe they've used ChatGPT a few times, and they're thinking to themselves, like, how is this going to actually work in the art world? Like ChatGPT, you say like, hey, can you write me a cover letter to like work at a job at, McDonald's, and it will write me a cover letter. But like, how is it going to work in the art world, in the visual arts world? Can you explain it to somebody who is like, like 65, to my dad? My dad's listening to this. I'm sure he's listening to this. Okay.
Hi, Dad.
Hi, Dad. Right. He's like 70 years old, very, very technically savvy, but is thinking to himself, like, how is this going to replace visual arts? How does it replace visual arts? And specifically, how might it define art from the Arab world specifically? Like, all this stuff is so Western.
Yes. Well, that is a little bit tricky, but I can speak to the first part at least confidently, and maybe the second part we can
unpack,
speculate together. So I guess to explain it, I mean, ChatGPT, so you are basically asking it a question and you're having a chat with it, you're having a conversation, and it's telling you what it knows. But really what it knows is what hundreds of thousands or millions of data sets have been fed into it knows. So you teach, and most of these are called generative adversarial networks. And what they are is you basically teach it by trial and error. And then it kind of learns if something is red or blue by trial and error, and then it teaches itself. So the thing about artificial intelligence that's super powerful, and I think that's why it's hard for people to wrap their brains around it, is if I teach you something right now, you learn it, right? But you're the only one that learns it. So I'm teaching you how to say a word in Arabic that's very Egyptian. So I teach it to you, Mikey, I'm going to teach you how to say this word ishta. And then you learn it. And I tell you, ishta means cream, but it actually also means high five, right? And then only Mikey knows it. But when you teach AI something, all AI know it. So imagine you have like millions of Mikeys and they all know this thing.
It's like a very gossipy family.
Exactly. And then someone else at the other end of the world is using it and can access that information as well. So that's why it's so powerful, because it works with data sets. So basically with something like Midjourney or DALL-E or these like image generation the spaces, you feed it so many images and you tell it what the images are. And so you show it like all kinds of ducks and like all kinds of cows and all kinds of skies and all kinds of colors and everything you can possibly imagine. And so when you as a user are basically entering text, you tell it, can you make me a duck that's red, that's sitting in a river, that is wearing a hat, that's a 20th, like let's say a 40s style, I don't know, like hat and it is, let's say, smoking a cigar. And then it does it for you because it has so many images. So it's just essentially it's pulling, but because it has so many, it does it at a really fast rate and it's pulling from an immense amount of data.
Yeah.
And so it's able to generate something that you've never really seen before because, and again, the more you know art, the better you can use it. And this is the same thing with ChatGPT. So the more informed you are on a topic, you can massage it to write something super powerful because you really know. And so you're really giving it the right cues. So it's all about the right cues. So you can tell it to pull something from a particular era in a particular artistic style. You can tell it to write something in the tone of so you can tell it to write something in the tone of Shakespeare, but about something from today, and it will do it because it has this immense amount of knowledge. So this is why people are overwhelmed by it, because it's able to produce these beautiful images that are powerful, that are original, if you want to call them original. Never seen them before, and they're very reminiscent of like surrealist paintings, those Dali paintings, where you think that it's like a dreamscape. It looks like a dreamscape. It's not from this world because it's composed of beyond what we know. So it's everybody's art and everybody's design and everybody's creativity together. Then it pulls from that. So you're making something that is like amazing.
So the original data set, right? The original data set. So the day OpenAI sort of uncorked their ChatGPT 3, right?
Yeah.
And DALL-E and stuff like that. In theory, all the data that they were working with, let's just talk about visual data. All the visual data that they were working with was non-AI generated, because the AI that we think of today didn't exist. Although it does get a little murky, because when you think about all these like tools on Illustrator and stuff like that create interesting sort of fills and interesting effects and stuff like that, this is like sort of could be described as AI as well, right? But let's ignore that, right? So let's use generative AI. So it was using a data set that's all, for the lack of a better term, human generated, right? Human generated art. Then all of a sudden, this tool is like a fire hose, and it will by far generate more art in like 5 years of existence than probably all of human history combined, right?
Yeah.
So the data set, the percentage of human generated art in the public data set is going to exponentially get smaller. So today it's probably like 99%. Next year will be 90. Then the year after that, 50. At some point, it will just be like referencing itself, self-referential, right? So my question is, in the Arab world, the AI that is generating the DALL-E generated Arabic-looking art, right, are not written by people who are culturally conversant with this region. And this is not an Arab world phenomenon. We are not special in this way. This is true for most regions around the world, but it's true about this region. And so what's interesting about this is that when somebody goes into DALL-E and says, hey, I want a Venetian sunset painted in the style of like Saliba Dwehi.
Yeah.
The people who are writing that thing have no idea what Saliba Dwehi is.
Oui.
So like the 99% of the art, the Arab art, for example, is going to be unconnected to the region almost entirely, almost certainly and almost entirely.
Maybe.
Right?
Maybe. But maybe there will be people who take on this initiative, like people like Mona Diep, for example, who is looking at the ethics of this region and kind of thinking about how to integrate that with, let's say, the research that she's doing. So that's not necessarily art related, but I believe that there is a lot of artists who are trying to kind of look at archives and look at how to allow AI or how to teach AI on archives that are non-white dominant, non-Western dominant. And I think that there's a lot of promising possibility, because I think first of all, we have to say that archives are super important. So artistic and design archives in the region are super important. I know a number of people who are pioneering in this area and really focusing on preserving those art and design pieces and examples of the history of visual culture in the region. But for example, there's an artist called Rafiq Anadol who worked in the MoMA and produced this piece. I think it was curated by Paola Antonelli out of the MoMA. And it was feeding the AI the archive of the MoMA, of all of the art archive that existed in the MoMA, and then trying to have the AI kind of fill the gaps and create new forms that could have existed, but didn't, And so it's almost like generating the possibility of what could have happened if these artists maybe had collaborated, or if these artists had met one another, or if there wasn't this particular war in this region. And I think that's where it gets really exciting for our region, because we are a region that is that has been affected by a number of powerful changes, right? Whether it's colonialism or the very kind of serious pan-Arabism or nationalism. And there's a lot of kind of forces at play. And then kind of this forced globalism that we're in at the moment that's erasing our identity a little bit. And this is why we're doing this project on Arabic calligraphy and typography, because we really want to bring calligraphy back to its golden era. We really want to celebrate that, which we're losing because of this technology. So I think there is room, but I think we have to have more people who are invested in that space, in working and promoting that space, in focusing on how to bring the voices of these amazing artists and allow people to access them archivally. So archives are great, and I think archive is just a smaller version of a data set. But I think the lack of data sets with AI from the region is problematic. So the lack of data sets for Arabic language is a huge problem. And this is one of the things, let's say that Arshia Subhan, he's in Simon Fraser University, he's a PhD student there, and that's the focus of his PhD, is like looking at expanding Arabic language data sets. And we're doing that with our grant. I mean, he's also working with us on this grant, because I think just creating an Arabic language data set to be able to have AI used is so important, because we don't have it and we don't have enough. And I think the same would go for artworks, design works, archives in all kinds of creative spaces and beyond, and written novels, written histories, all of that.
Amazing. Okay, my last question to you is, in terms of next steps, if you were to speak to policymakers, people who run universities, people who run cultural institutions, what are the things that they need to be thinking about, and what are the major things that they need to be working on? Both, I guess, as well as practitioners, students and artists as well.
I think whether it's AI or non-AI, I think the main thing people need to be thinking about is ethics, right? What is driving our society? Where do we want to go? Where do we want to be? And then that should be sort of the underlying current of how we steer our interface with AI, or our connection, our collaboration, our relationship with AI. So we need to go back and think, what do we really want? Because AI has the potential to do anything. It has the potential to destroy the world as we know it, and it has the potential to liberate us from the confinements of this like productive trap, and allow us to experience the world in a different, more beautiful, more amazing way. I mean, I think the reason why we create art, the reason why we are creative, is because we want to understand the world we live in. It's almost like an existential question. Like, you can't have a human being without creativity. And creativity is really built on this ability to liberate yourself from predictability, to liberate yourself from the very kind of narrow focused confinements of predictability and how things should be. So I think if people, institutions, government, anyone who has influence on this are thinking about ethics, how can we make algorithms more inclusive? How can we make AI more ethical? How can we think about the average person, not think about which giant mega, technological company is going to release this new technology before the other, or kind of like Oppenheimer, like who's going to make the atom bomb before Nazis do? And I think in that scenario, they weren't really thinking about the average person. They weren't thinking about what's going to happen to this Chinese citizen when they have an atom bomb dropped on them. They were really thinking about competition. And I think that's what we need to be thinking about. Like, who do we want to think about? Whose lives are going to improve with this? And then how can we make the lives of the average person better? And if that is the underlying current, the underlying motivation behind why we interface with AI, then I think we're on an amazing track. I think the world will be a better place.
Amazing. Okay, I want to wrap up with just a few of the quick Q&As. So, what are you reading or watching these days?
I've just finished a book called Orwell's Roses. It's about George Orwell and his love for roses, but it's also intertwined with politics, with communism, with systems of governance, and at the same time, man's quest for existential understanding and beauty.
Okay, amazing. And the last question, I'm going to switch some of these, the quick Q&A. I'm going to ask you just if you were to recommend a few typographers and art historians for people to go check out, who would you recommend?
Wow. I mean, art historian. I mean, the Hayish Hit, of course. She's one of my favorite human beings and dear friend. Typographers and type designers, or even people researching, I would recommend Arshia Subhan's work. He's a PhD student, but he's making amazing, amazing work. He's really a pioneer in AI. And if you're interested in AI and Arabic, that's what you should look up.
Cool. Basma, you are always so much fun to talk to. Thanks for being on this series. I love your work and I love hearing you unpack these very complicated ideas. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. It was absolutely my pleasure, as always.